In October 2025, former President Donald Trump shocked the world when he announced the 10th package of sanctions against Africa. It was one of the toughest foreign policy decisions in modern U.S. history. Billions of dollars belonging to African businesses and governments were frozen in American banks, trade routes were shut down, and access to global finance through the SWIFT system was blocked. African goods entering the United States faced heavy new tariffs, and high-tech projects, including 5G networks and satellite programs, were abruptly canceled. Even remittances from African immigrants in the U.S. were restricted, cutting off money that families depended on. Washington said these actions were necessary because African nations were turning away from the dollar, building stronger ties with Russia and China, and talking about creating a new common African currency. To U.S. officials, that looked like a threat to America's financial dominance. But in Africa, it was seen very differently. Across the continent, people viewed the sanctions as punishment for trying to control their own resources and economic future. And out of that anger rose a new voice, a young leader named Ibrahim Traore, the president of Burkina Faso. At just 36 years old, he became a symbol of defiance. Speaking before his people, he said that Africa had spent decades giving away its gold, oil, and uranium to enrich the West while its own citizens lived in poverty. Now that Africa wanted to use its wealth for its own development, he argued, it was suddenly being called a threat. His words struck a deep chord not only in Burkina Faso but across the entire continent. Within days, leaders of Mali, Niger, and Burkina Faso stood together and declared that no sanctions could break their will. Massive rallies filled the streets, with citizens waving flags and chanting that Africa would never kneel again. What Washington expected to divide the continent had instead united it. Meanwhile, countries like Russia, China, Iran, and Turkey quickly stepped in to fill the gap left by the United States, offering new trade, military, and technology deals. Rather than isolating Africa, the sanctions had created an opening for America's rivals to gain influence. Within weeks, even European allies began questioning whether the U.S. had gone too far, as energy prices rose and trade disruptions hit global markets. Headlines in Western newspapers started to change tone, calling the move a political gamble that had backfired. Then came a powerful moment that symbolized how much things had shifted. The BRICS alliance invited President Traoré to give a keynote speech at their summit. Standing before leaders from Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, Traoré said, "Africa does not beg for freedom. Africa claims it." The words echoed across the global South. For many, he had become more than a president. He was a symbol of a new, self-confident Africa. The sanctions that were meant to weaken the continent had instead awakened it. And now, a question hangs in the air. Did America's actions protect its power, or did they push away a rising continent that simply wanted respect? Whatever the answer, one thing is clear. Africa is no longer asking for permission to stand tall. It already has.